Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Mike Papantonio, sitting in for Thom Hartmann today. This past weekend, Americans marched on Washington to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's historic March on the City. That march this weekend echoed the march of 50 years ago. And what we know is that things are still upside down where it comes to so many parts of civil rights in this country. Just not only civil rights, but just how inhumane some of the treating is of all Americans, the haves versus the have-nots. It was really about many things. But one thing that we tried to focus on with that march was the idea that voting rights in America are at risk. They're being taken away, intentionally taken away, maliciously taken away, with the thought of really taking a democracy down to look something like a third world country. We have Brad Friedman. He's the founder of bradblog.com and host of the Bradcast on Wednesday on KPFK in Los Angeles, and he is a longtime friend of mine, somebody I really trust. Brad, I don't know what to think about Holder. It sounds to me, I read your material, Holder gets tough on voting rights. I'm not so convinced. I've heard this speech before. Tell me, talk me out of that, would you?
Well, no, I can't. But how you doing, my friend? You have a right to be skeptical. You should be skeptical. You're a journalist here, of course. I'm a journalist. We should all be skeptical. To a certain extent, I'm willing to reset the page, if you will, since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in June, and to see how Holder will behave now. He has promised aggressive action. He has taken some of that aggressive action in Texas. This is a change from what he had done before, what he had done prior to the 2012 election, when you know that you and I both have been very critical of Holder. So I will give him a chance here. So far, so good in Texas. Let's see what he does now in North Carolina, however, because, I mean, they have just passed the worst set of voter suppression laws since the Jim Crow era. Period.
Yeah, people hear how bad it is, Brad, but lay it out a little bit. Let's talk about it's almost like they've borrowed every bad part of every voting restriction law in the world and said, we're going to visit it here right in North Carolina.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, all of the lousy laws you've heard about that Republicans have been trying to pass over the last several years in state after state, they passed all of them at once, virtually overnight in North Carolina. They're cutting back early voting hours. They're ending same-day registration. They're ending Sunday voting. They're ending pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. They're instituting disenfranchising polling place photo ID laws that they know will disenfranchise tens, if not hundreds of thousands of minority voters. They know this because they were told this before they passed the bill in the Assembly. And that could come up as a very important point if Eric Holder decides to pursue action here under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, since he can no longer use Section 5 following the gutting, the knife in the heart of the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court accomplished, or I should say the right wing of the Supreme Court accomplished in June. So
Section 3 is an avenue also that the DOJ is using, and that is you have to show you really have to show intentional violation of the 14th and 15th Amendment. I think the case that's a test on that is Perez versus Texas v. United States.
That's right.
Does he have enough to work with in a place like North Carolina, Brad, in your estimation? You've been following voter rights a long time. And does he have enough to work with if he will use all the tools at his disposal, as he tells us that he intends to do?
Yeah, he has enough to work with in North Carolina, but that depends on how Texas goes. That's going to sort of be a test. If they're able to, for example, bail in Texas under Section 3 and require the entire state of Texas to have pre-clearance for new voting laws again, then yes, that same strategy should work in North Carolina. So he has the tools. The question is, how aggressive is he going to be? And I can't underscore, Mike, how important this is. This is not just a throwback to the era of Jim Crow, but this is the government taking away the most basic right that citizens have. The only way we can have self-governance is if we retain the vote. And as that's being taken away, and as the right to oversee how our government works is being taken away in all areas, really. We have an article, feature at bradblog.com today on these redactions in the FISA court documents that are completely inappropriate and unnecessary. The government is trying to keep the public from being able to oversee its own governance. That's what this is about. That's why this fight is so important. And that's why
because
right now,
it is
could be more important.
It's the last equalizer. There's so many myths that we have kicking around in America. The Horatio Alger myth that comes to mind. There's so many myths that that we sometimes lose a few realities. But one reality that is not a myth is that the right to vote is the great equalizer where it comes to push back for things like a corporate America that has such control over our government that we're barely in control of that government. Texas is a great example. Look, isn't it fairly easy down in Texas? I mean, you had Texas Republicans that drew up the state legislative lines. They consciously replaced districts that were active with Hispanic voters in order to create a low Hispanic voter turnout, in order to strengthen the voting powers of districts where you have Anglo citizens. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to see that, yes, that is intentional. It was malicious. It was there to interfere with 14th and 15th Amendment rights. Isn't that the place to start your war? And maybe that's the wisdom of what he's doing. I'm trying to believe in this man that I have so little faith in.
Well, you're right. It does not take a rocket scientist. What it takes is the Department of Justice and a federal court, both of which saw what happened last year in that Texas redistricting case and found that it was purposely discriminatory. The same thing with the photo ID law restriction that they tried to implement in Texas as well. Those have already been found to be purposely discriminatory, and they were stopped under the Voting Rights Act last year. That all changed with the Supreme Court. So while it doesn't take a rocket scientist, it does take a good federal court. The question is, all of these matters are eventually going to find their way back up to the Supreme Court of the United States, the same court that gutted the Voting Rights Act, and how that right-wing extremist activist court is going to judge here is the real question and the real disturbing question.
Let me point out, Brad, that we always pay attention to the shiny things as progressives, and that is what's going to happen to the Supreme Court. We miss the fact that at the lower court, the appellate courts, lower appellate courts have the ability to hold this up for so long that we'll be well past 2016 before we ever get any resolution. They have the ability to do that. Even when there's a claim of exigent circumstances, they have the ability to do that. And we know this. We know the Republicans have been brilliant in packing the court, not with judges, but with politicians that happen to wear black robes. They're barely, it's not a judicial temperament. It's a political ideology temperament that drives these federal judges that I appear in front of all the time. It's remarkable. You see it right there on their face. You see it in their orders that they write. So isn't part of the problem the big obstacle, not just to the Supreme Court, but all the federal courts in between?
It is, and it can be. But since I know you're looking for some good news here, let me say that the courts tend to deal with election questions on an expedited basis. You know, if there's an election coming up in a month, they'll move things out of the way in the docket to deal with something like this. Now, they may put a stay on the new law. It might not be fully decided. It might be a temporary stay. But we see this, for example, in Pennsylvania right now, where they're fighting the same thing. They're fighting against this photo ID restriction that may well disenfranchise tens of thousands of perfectly legal voters, who have the crime of being old or being minorities living in cities, so they don't have a car, they don't have a driver's license. That case is currently in court, and the judge, thankfully, has put a stay on the photo ID law in Pennsylvania until it can be permanently decided. So that's the good news. Hopefully the courts will come in and do the right thing, in the short term before the upcoming election, whatever that election may be.
What is, in about a minute, Brad, what is the predicate that the DOJ has to show? Do they need to go, does it have to be an analysis, kind of just of a statistical analysis that sometimes takes a huge amount of time to even present the case? Got about a minute. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, well, there's a question about exactly what they do have to show. If they are able to show that this was purposeful discrimination in Texas, then it should be a slam dunk, and they should be able to bail the entire state of Texas, because it is, the state of Texas that is passing this law. They should be able to bail them in, so they are required to pre-clear all their new laws with the federal government. But we'll see if, in fact, that will happen, because we're really on all new territory here, post Voting Rights Act gutting by the Supreme Court.
Brad Friedman, thank you for joining me. Holder gets tough on voting rights, according to Brad. We'll see if that is going to play itself out. I'm Mike Papantonio in for Thom Hartmann. Follow me on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio. Let me know what you're thinking. I'll be right back.